Jesse taking it all in, ain't he? This is a special tribute celebration for Miss Franklin, Aretha Franklin, a true Southern Memphis belle. Yeah.
And that was Faith Hill performing at Aretha Franklin's tribute. That was amazing.
I seen Louis Farrakhan sitting back there in the back too.
Mitchell reports.
And today, the world in Detroit bidding a final farewell to the indisputable Queen of Soul. You heard Faith Hill. Aretha Franklin being laid to rest today in her hometown, Motown, of course, Detroit. Franklin died August 16th. She was 76 years old following her battle with pancreatic cancer. This morning, she was brought to the Greater Grace Temple in a white Cadillac, LaSalle hearse, that once carried Rosa Parks. Outside, the streets were lined with more than 100 pink Cadillacs, a nod to her hit song, Freeway of Love. The funeral service is underway. It's continuing right now, about an hour behind schedule, and includes star-studded musical tributes honoring Franklin's life and legacy. And, of course, political tributes. Hillary and Bill Clinton are there. Bill Clinton arriving to a standing ovation as they arrived earlier for the service. The former president will be one of the eulogists we will hear from this hour. Joining me now outside, NBC's Ron Mott, who's been outside Greater Grace Temple and talking to people there. And what a parade of political, civil rights legends, and of course the musical legends. Ron?
It's an A-list group of people here to mourn, but mostly to celebrate the life of Aretha Franklin. And I hope people brought their comfortable shoes because, as you mentioned, Andrea, the program is running a little over an hour behind. And just a word of advice for the folks who are in there, if the spirit gets moving, we might be here all night. It is clearly a celebration of this life. And Aretha Franklin certainly would be proud of the A-listers that she could attract to her homegoing service. But these people are the ones that she really cared about. And these are just your average, everyday Detroiters who stood in line. Some of them got here last night to try to get into this church service. Initially, the family was just going to keep it fairly small, a private invitation-only event. But the turnout this week, all the tributes and the cards and notes that people wrote to Aretha Franklin and to her family, the family is deciding to let about 1,000 of these folks in. So we hope that they get in before the service gets too far along. You just heard that beautiful rendition by Faith Hill. There are all sorts of folks from all over the country in different industries, not just entertainment, but the world of politics. And in the parlance of some of the younger people today, Aretha Franklin was more than an entertainer. She just wasn't a person who could sing songs. She was woke, as they say. She had a conscience about trying to help the every man and the every woman find their opportunities here in the United States. And she had her civil rights chops, if you will, back in the civil rights movement. She was right there with Dr. Martin Luther King and the rest of them to lend her credibility and her voice and her power to the movement. And so she's not just missed because she had one of those voices that you'll never forget, but she was a part of this community, could have lived anywhere, but decided to make Detroit home. And these people love her for that, Andrea.
And of course, her father, the minister, of course, was one of the big clergymen, not only with Dr. King, but with Daddy King. So she comes from a long line of civil rights leaders. She was really part of the movement. And it's interesting to see the panoply of civil rights leaders. Of course, right there at the church, we see Reverend Al, we see the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who has been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, but was so close to Aretha Franklin and is part of that legacy. Bill Clinton, of course, there, and he's going to give one of the eulogies. And also the Reverend Farrakhan, a very controversial leader from the Nation of Islam, who is also there. So it's an inclusive group. We can see also on screen some of that parade of pink Cadillacs. I mean, the drama of this funeral and what Aretha Franklin means to the nation, not just to Detroit, and to the world of music, the world of civil rights, the world of politics. And the fact that Bill and Hillary Clinton were really mobbed by the crowd. Now, you mentioned the people waiting outside, and you said they were average, everyday Detroiters. I think today there are no average Detroiters. They're all very special as part of that larger Aretha Franklin family. But what about the weather, if I could ask you, Ron? Is it still, pushing up there in the high 90s, or is it cooling off at all?
It's very, I would say, perfect. Unlike earlier in the week when it was sizzling hot here in Detroit. Just great weather. People are in a great mood, really. I mean, after all, this is a funeral. We're saying goodbye to an American treasure. But this is a true celebration. I mean, some of those, once those gospel songs get going, you can't help but move your feet. That's the kind of spirit that she carried for 76 years. And again, she was one of my favorite singers, and had that kind of voice where you heard one or two notes and you just knew instantly who it was, and you kind of stopped what you're doing, crank the volume up. We're going to miss that, but that catalog, that body of work she left us, we will of course get to enjoy for a very long time. And you mentioned those pink Cadillacs, Andrew. They're just off our camera position this way. There must be 115 of those Cadillacs down there. We're all joking about when those drivers come out from the service to get back in their cars, it may take them a while to figure out whose car is who. There are so many similar looking Cadillacs down there, and if they are able to join the processional, that is going to be quite a scene in this city, from Greater Grace Temple over to Woodlawn Cemetery, where she's going to be buried alongside her dad and some other family members there. So it's a great day. It's been a great week here in Detroit, and looking forward to just listening to that voice resonate for a very long time, Andrea.
And we've been watching your coverage, Ron, and some of the people online who've been singing out and singing R-E-S-P-E-C-T. There's some great voices there from some of the people. We should do an America's Got Talent or some sort of a contest out there right on the streets of Detroit. Joining us now, Ron, David Marinis, Associate Editor of the Washington Post and author, among other great books, of Once in a Great City, A Detroit Story, and Robin Givhan, Washington Post fashion critic, former reporter for the Detroit Free Press, so a Motown native as well. Welcome both. David, one of the things that you've written about Aretha, which really caught my eye, was you wrote in today's Post that Aretha was not a manufactured image like many of today's performers, but a sound, a supernaturally wondrous sound from this natural woman, great reference there, who made us all feel so alive. If the human voice is the most glorious of instruments, Aretha Franklin was the proof.
She was a pioneer.
Speak to me about that.
She was a pioneer.
Well, she was, of course, an image in many respects, but what we remember most is that amazing voice. A voice unlike any other that we could all sing to, even if none of us could sing like Aretha Franklin. And it combined so many different elements of her and of America. She was of Detroit. She wasn't part of Motown.
She was a diva.
Was as good or better than any of the Motown singers. She came out of the church, the gospel choir of her father, the Reverend C.L. Franklin. She could combine gospel with rock and soul and even opera. She could do it all. And so that's why she's so much more than an image.
And I was so struck by learning something that I have not known. She was, first of all, she played the piano. Her mother was a pianist. She played the piano from childhood. One of her childhood friends saying that, when she was 5 years old, she was on the keyboard, and that she went and enrolled in Juilliard in the 1990s, the late 90s, because she wanted to refine her classical piano education. And in fact, stood in at one of the Grammys and jumped in when her great friend was, I'm trying to remember which great singer.
It was Pavarotti.
Was it Pavarotti? Okay. And ended up singing his aria live at the Grammys. In Italian.
That great friend you're talking about that childhood friend was Smokey Robinson, who was a great friend of Aretha's older brother, Cecil Franklin, and came over to the big Franklin house on Oakland Avenue in Detroit and saw this, what he called a cutie pie, playing the piano. She was 3 or 4 years old, and that was Aretha Franklin. She did have great musical talent in every respect.
Yes, she did.
And, of course, her style. I will never forget the the gray, it looked like felt hat, Robin, at the inaugural, the Obama inaugural, how meaningful that was. But it wasn't, of course, the first inaugural, because she was at the Clinton inaugural as well. But also, the 3 dress changes this week. I mean, starting with the red dress and the red heels at the first viewing. Talk about that, because I don't know if any figure in American history could have pulled off 3 fashion changes during the funeral week.
Well, to say that it was a bit unorthodox, I think would be an understatement. But I also think that it was very much in sort of keeping with the larger-than-life presence of Aretha Franklin. I mean, one of the things that we so remember about her is her willingness, her love for just full-on glamour.
Right.
And she combined, these sorts of elements that you would think of from Sunday church service, the glorious hat, with pure Hollywood glamour in the form of, fur coats and the glittering gowns. So the idea that she would sort of go to her final resting place after 3 or 4 costume changes seems to only reiterate this idea of her using fashion as a way of just sort of establishing her place in the universe.
Right.
And even the fact that she always carried her purse. Just like that other queen, known as Elizabeth II. She was the queen, and even on the stage at the Kennedy Honors, carried her purse out, put it on the piano. That was part of the signature, and the full mink coat or sable or whatever it is. It was magnificent. Well, I mean,
some people have said that part of the reason for keeping her purse close was because she liked to be paid just before she would go to perform, and she wanted to keep an eye on her paycheck. But there are many ways in which she could have done that. And I think the decision to, use the handbag as that statement was sort of this combination of, one, her love for fashion. Also, it's a woman's accessory that sort of proudly announced her presence, not just as a singer, but as a powerful woman who was in control. So I think it sort of added up to a lot of things, just that very simple gesture.
And what we're seeing in the lower right.
They're not saying it right now, but I am. Plus the fact that she was raised up in the era of the great women's lib movement that actually began out west, out in California, in the, I guess it would be the 30s, even throughout the 40s, out throughout California, but then it swept over here in the 60s. And throughout the 70s, and she was a part of that movement. She was a part of women speaking out, saying, we can do more than just be housewives and raise children and be nothing more than subservience towards being slaves, towards being a house cleaner. We can do more. And women was really speaking out during that time. And I remember her so well in the movements that she was making, leaving a legacy behind.
When Aretha Franklin was first coming into her own in late 1962, she sang at her father's church at the memorial service for the great Dinah Washington. And there have been so many of these amazing funeral services in Detroit because so many phenomenal people have come out of that city. She also sang at the memorial service for Rosa Parks, who also was, the service was in the same Greater Grace Temple that she's being honored at today. So this, Detroit has had a lot of difficult times. Aretha moved away from Detroit but always came back, and a few years ago she established herself back in Detroit in her final few years, and I think this is all part of the glory of Detroit and its attempt to come back as a great city.
And of course, we shouldn't forget that only this week we've had the water problem in Detroit City schools and Flint and all the rest of it. So it's a very complex picture. We just saw a shot, by the way, David, as you were speaking of Smokey Robinson, so thanks for that reminder.
Right.
Well, and of course, thanks to you, we'll have much more on this. Ariana Grande and others are going to be singing, and of course the Bill Clinton tribute will all carry that live. But it's been a day of emotion, a day of memorials again on Capitol Hill, the final farewell to the Senate today of John McCain. We will bring you those services, reminders of what is happening in Washington today. Coming up at 1 o'clock Eastern, the public is going to be invited in, where the leaders of the Senate, the House, of course the Vice President, bipartisan tribute today to John McCain. Stay with us.
Dear Stephen,